Hello and welcome to another professional development training for Coleman University. This time we'll be looking at how to set up and use one of the most powerful and somewhat difficult tools in Moodle, the lesson. The lesson tool is limited only by your imagination and the time you have available to create it. It can be a powerful asset to an on-ground or online class, allowing students to work through the material at their own pace or even to achieve mastery of a subject through directed repetition. In today's training, we will look not only at the tool itself, but the best ways for you to prepare to use the tool. We will examine what needs to be done prior to building the tool, both in terms of understanding existing student knowledge and what needs to be learned. We will look at some of the methods that we can use to effectively lay out our lesson to make its input into Moodle easier. Finally, we will introduce the terms used in the Moodle tool, demonstrate how to build and test one, and how to use it as a gradable item in your course. Prior to jumping into Moodle, some thought has to be given as to exactly what needs to be accomplished in the lesson itself. First, state the objective of the lesson. What should the students be able to do or understand at the completion of the lesson? Second is to determine what the students know before they start the lesson, the baseline existing knowledge. Third, we must figure out where the student should be at the end of the lesson. Finally, and this is the most difficult part of this exercise, to create a flow of ideas and activities that will take the students from the known to the unknown. The first time through this process, I strongly suggest that you keep it as simple as possible by only using binary choices, yes, no, hot, cold, and only having one or two directions to go to from a single page, rather than creating multiple paths at each page. There are many methods to use to lay out the flow of ideas, from the graphic and digital to the most basic paper-based manual process. One of the simplest ways to lay this out is to use index cards, each with a single idea, and then move them around to build a logical flow of concepts. From there, you can add in question cards and build in ways to test knowledge. Alternatively, you can use the drawing tools in Word to create text boxes with connector lines to link them together, as shown here. There doesn't need to be a binary question for each page. You can directly link one page to another using a simple Continue button. The names on these buttons are up to you, so you can make this as custom as you wish. As a final suggestion, number all the cards or the proto pages to make the organization easier. Once we have the layout, we will be able to translate that information relatively easily into Moodle. But first, it would help if we better understood the terms and types of pages in this tool. There are two basic page types, content and question. Content pages contain the information component of the lesson. Question pages are similar to the individual question pages on a Moodle quiz and allow us to assess student knowledge, to the point of even being graded activities. The action, or path of movement between the pages, is referred to as a jump. Jumps can be relative, moving from one page to the page below it on the master list, or absolute, where the path moves from one identified page directly to a second identified page. Another term you'll see in the lesson tool is the cluster. This is a random group of question pages that can be used much like an embedded quiz within the lesson. We will not be discussing this portion of the tool in this class due to time limitations, but you're strongly encouraged to visit Moodle.org if you wish to learn more about it. Content pages are the heart of the lesson, the information the students have to learn. You can include text, video clips, pictures, diagrams, equations, hyperlinks. Anything that would work within a typical text box within Moodle can work here. Moving from one content page to another page is accomplished through the use of embedded buttons. The buttons can be titled by the author, who also controls where the button jumps to in the lesson. These buttons can act as answer choices for directional questions to cause students with different understanding levels to take different paths through the same lesson. We'll see some examples of that in a few moments. Question pages, on the other hand, are basically mini quizzes set within the lesson to determine student learning or to provide a path to relearn a topic. Just as with quizzes, you can select the type of question, multiple choice, true, false, essay, fill in the blank, and the system will automatically grade it, except for essay questions, of course. An interesting aspect of the question page is that each individual answer to a question can direct the student down a different path through the pages, allowing for a highly targeted relearning of a concept. Here's an example of a fairly simple lesson with a couple of question pages. This was created as a flowchart using Word's drawing tools. Flowcharting the lesson is a very helpful way to start this process, as the teacher can get the grand overview of the lesson he or she is creating. This example is composed of 2 question pages and 6 content pages. We have a version of this built in Moodle we'll share with you momentarily. Here you see how Moodle lays out a lesson after we've made our inputs. Notice that while the pages were numbered to help us in the creation process, we should remove those numbers in the final version. Students won't understand them and it may create confusion. You'll notice there are a number of direct jumps from one page to another, as well as a split jump from a question page, either leading the student back into the material for review or moving the student forward in the lesson. Now that the preliminaries are behind us, let's go into Moodle and see how we can put one of these lessons together. Turn Editing on, choose Activity, and then choose Lesson. In the General box, enter the mandatory name. You can enter a time limit if you wish for the lesson. You can set up when the lesson opens, availability, and when it closes, deadline. You can set the maximum number of answers, which really means the number of potential buttons available at the bottom of every page in your lesson. The default is 4, but you can set it to however many you want. We'll leave it at 4. In the grade box, you can select the number of points the lesson is worth, as well as the grade category. Here we'll just leave it at 100 and uncategorized. There are 5 options in the Grade Options box. If you wish the lesson to be a non-graded activity, then select Yes for Practice Lesson. If you do so, the lesson will not appear in the gradebook, but will be fully functional in your course. The default is No. The Custom Scoring option allows you to set a unique point value for each question throughout the lesson, rather than having a flat common value. The default is Yes. If you wish to allow retakes, make sure the option is Yes. If you do select Allow Retakes, the Handling option becomes active and allows you to choose how you want the final grade entered, using the mean or the highest maximum score. The final option allows you to display an ongoing running score for students as they progress through the lesson. The default is No. There are 6 options in the Flow Control box, with an additional 5 advanced settings which must be unhid. First, allow student review. Let students go back and navigate their way through the lesson again from the start. This is not a retake, but a review of prior answers. The Provide option to try a question again allows students who answered a question incorrectly the chance to try it a second time for no point credit or just to continue with the lesson. The maximum number of attempts setting is how many times a student can take the lesson. The Display Default Feedback option will show the phrase, "That's the correct answer," or "That's the wrong answer," in the event no specific feedback was entered for a question by the instructor. The Progress Bar option displays a progress bar on the bottom of the lesson page showing the percentage of completion. The Display Left Menu setting will display a list of pages in the lesson in a column on the left, like a table of contents. The default is No. Click Show Advanced. Most of these advanced options are rarely used, but it's good to know that they're available. The advanced option, Display Left Menu only if grade is greater than, allows the instructor to set a minimum grade the student must achieve before being able to view the left menu, assuming that you've allowed the left menu to be displayed. This effectively means the student must go through the entire lesson on their first attempt before being able to use the left menu to review specific segments. The Minimum Number of Questions option should be set to 0 if there are 1 or more content pages in your lesson. If all of the pages in your lesson are question pages, you should inform students of the minimum number of questions they should answer before leaving the lesson, as the system will grade based on the number you enter here, no matter how many questions the students actually answered. The Number of Pages to Show option is only valid for lessons that have pages shown in a random order. The default is 0, and it should be left alone in most cases. The slideshow option allows the lesson to be displayed as a slideshow with a fixed height and width. The advanced option, Link to an Activity, allows the instructor to link to a course activity at the end of the lesson, basically funneling the student from the lesson directly to a specific part of the course. The Pop-up to File or Web Page box allows you to include a pop-up window at the beginning of the lesson. Every lesson page will include a link to reopen this pop-up if necessary. The use of pop-up blockers by students makes this particular activity somewhat problematic. While shown here due to the site settings in the test platform, the option box for Dependent On and Activity Completion box are not often visible in other instances of Moodle. They will not be discussed here. For the common module settings, you can set a gradebook ID number and allow the students to see or not see the lesson, the same effect as opening or shutting the eye on the front page. Save and display to enter the lesson editing mode. There are 4 tabs on the lesson tool page: Preview, Edit, Reports, and Grade Essays. The page opens to the Edit tab and in the collapsed view. We can import our questions, add a cluster, add a single content page, or a single question page. The Preview tab allows us to give our lesson a try. The Reports tab is how we assess how well our students have done on the lesson. The Grade Essays tab is not useful unless you've embedded essay questions in your lesson. If you have, you would go to this tab to manually grade them. In this simple example, we'll start by adding a content page. In the content page, the only required fields are the title of the page and the description, the title of the first button. It is important to use a title that is unique. While numbering our index cards or flowchart boxes can be helpful in assembling and transferring our thoughts, we do not want to enter those numbers in these page titles as they're visible to the students. The page content box, a full rich text HTML editor, can include text, hyperlinks, video, pictures, symbols, mathematical equations, anything else necessary to teach the students this portion of the lesson. Just so we can see how these pages lay out, let's call this Page 1. Even though it's not a very descriptive title, it'll work for our purposes. There are 2 click boxes in this area. The first one asks if we wish to arrange our content buttons horizontally. The default is yes. The second is if we want to make this an active item in the left menu, should we decide to make it visible, also defaulted to yes. Each content box within the Add a Content Page area should be considered a button that will be found on the bottom of the content page. The description will be shown on the button, even if it's quite lengthy. There is a pull-down below each description block giving you choices of format. The Moodle auto format is the default, and it's best to leave it at that setting. The other option within the content block is where the students will go within the lesson, i.e. the jump, when the button is pressed. If you wish to use absolute jumps, meaning those that are hardwired to a specific page, you will have to return and edit the setting, as the page must already exist before you can link to it with this button. As content or question pages are created, their titles will appear in the jump pull-downs throughout the lesson. A good practice is to leave the jumps set on their defaults until all the pages have been created, and then go back in editing mode and select the proper jumps. Relative jumps, those that go to the next page on the list, for instance, can be made at this point, but be aware that the list of pages must be aligned to your needs to ensure correct jumping. If we later insert a page between 2 existing pages, the jump from the first page will no longer go to what used to be the second page. Instead, it will jump to the middle page. I tend to prefer absolute jumps, as they are both easier to troubleshoot and less problematic when adding or removing pages on a list. Just to give you an idea of how this works, before we look at a real lesson, we'll simply put in some pages to show you how these elements work together. Our default setting for the lesson for maximum number of answers, in other words, the number of buttons, was 4. And as we see here, there are 4 buttons named Content 1, 2, 3, and 4 that represent those answers. Only the first button is required. Any content box that is not completed will not have its button shown on the content page. For a direct link from one page to another, you can simply title Content 1 Continue. and change the jump to the Next Page setting. Once we have entered our buttons, click Save Page to continue. And now we return to the beginning of our list of lesson pages in the Edit screen. We can see the page title, type, and any jumps associated with the page. Absolute jumps will have the title of the page being jumped to here. Then we have the typical action icons of moving within the list, editing, viewing, and deleting. The Add New Page pull-down is important. From this, we can add another content page, question page, or a number of other activities that will not be covered in this lesson. Each page will have the same pull-down. It is important that you select the pull-down just before where you want your new page to appear. So by selecting the correct pull-down, you create the list the way you wish it to be. This will make more sense after we enter a few more pages. Let's add a new content page by clicking on the Add a New Page pull-down and selecting Add a New Content Page as our option. Now that we've added a new content page, we realize we missed a page. This is where choosing the correct Add a Page pull-down becomes important. If we use the Page 3 pull-down, the new page will end up below Page 3 in the Page 4 position. If we use the pull-down in the Page 1 area, the new page will end up between Pages 1 and 3 in the Page 2 position where we want it to be. Of course, we could always just add the new page at the end of the list and use the Move icon to slide it up and down, but this is far fewer keystrokes. So we go ahead and add in Page 2 as well as Page 4 using the last pull-down on the list. If we wish to add a question, we could either do it at the end of the list by picking the very last Add a New Page pull-down, or somewhere in the middle by picking the appropriate pull-down on the page above the spot we wish the question to appear. Let's say we want the question page to appear after Page 2. So, using the pull-down on Page 2, we select Question, and a new input page appears. We select Type of Question from the pull-down, Essay, Matching, Multi-Choice, Numerical, Short Answer, or True-False. Here we'll just pick True-False, and then click Add a Question page. In the Add a New Question page that appears, there are a number of required fields: the title, page contents, the question stem really, the correct and wrong response answers. Let's fill them in. As with other text boxes, the question stem can include videos, pictures, equations, and even hyperlinks to web pages. For the correct response, we have to enter the correct answer, the text of which will appear either on a button or next to a radio button, depending on the type of question. There is a response box, which, if we fill it in, will appear when the correct answer is given. If we did not fill in the response box, the default response we selected earlier in the Add an Activity screen will appear. We have a jump pull-down, which indicates which page to go to if this answer is selected, along with how many points this question is worth, because we selected the option that questions can have variable worth in our Add an Activity screen. The same options appear in the wrong response, and each wrong answer can take students to a different page, or to the same one if we wish that. We can even give partial credit for a particular wrong answer. For now, click Save Page, and we see the question appears between Page 2 and 3 because of which pull-down box we selected earlier. As we can see, all of the default jumps are relative, and they stay on the same page from which they start, this page. In other words, they don't go anywhere. If we wanted to enter absolute jumps, or to correct any jumps, we would use the gear icon to edit each individual page. Here, let's edit Page 1 and have a jump to Page 2. So we click on the Edit icon and scroll down to our first button, Content 1, and use the pull-down to jump to Page 2. When we created this page, we only used one button. Perhaps we should add a second. What if our student does not want to take the lesson at this time? In Content 2, let's write Exit and set the jump to End of Lesson. Scroll down and save page. Now we see that our jumps for Page 1 have changed. The first button takes us to Page 2. The second button takes us to the end of the lesson. We could continue this with all the other pages, but rather than doing that, let's look at a lesson that we prepared earlier. You saw the layout in the PowerPoints. Losing your keys. Let's make sure editing is still on and click on the Lost Your Keys link to open up the editing screens once again. We arrive at the editing page, either on the Preview or Edit tab. If we're not already there, we will click on the Edit tab so we can see the layout of this lesson. On the Edit page, we have two choices, the collapsed or the expanded view. With the collapsed view, we see each page and what jumps there are to and from each page, which gives us the basic layout of the lesson. We saw a version of this earlier in the PowerPoints. If we need to see more detail in order to ensure that we have entered our lesson properly, we click on the expanded view. In the expanded view, we see each sequential page, both content and question, from the title through any textual content, such as a question stem with any pictures, down to the names of the buttons, content, and the associated jumps. Below each page, we have a number of links that give us similar options to those we had in the pull-downs of the collapsed screen. Now let's see how a student sees this. We can either use the preview option, or change our role to that of a student. Here we'll just use the preview option. We can try a few paths through the lesson to see what it would look like depending on which answers we give. You may note that depending on the path we take, there may be none, one, or two questions being asked of the student. If this were a graded activity, that would be problematic. This is something you want to keep in mind as you go through your design process to ensure that students are able to reach all of the questions they need to answer, no matter what their intermediate decisions may be or which buttons they push. That should be enough information to get you started using the lesson tool, and we think you'll agree that it is potentially a very powerful way to engage students. Please give it a try. As always, we hope you found this training helpful, and please do not forget to take the quiz associated with this training so that you can get credit for your time. We hope to see you again in a future professional development training. Thank you much, and hey, have a wonderful day.